Hello all, rural Alberta. We'll see how the video goes, but it always seems to upload after anyway in higher quality. For those joining me live, if it breaks up, it'll be available after the live. But I want to get into this, so I'll wait for everybody to start logging in. I just posted on my Facebook the actual poll I ran on Twitter after I solicited 500 citizens from USA, Russia, and Canada. Now, I went by nearly population. I went 300 American citizens, official ones, where I go through their profile and prove that they're legit through their acquaintances, who follows them, who they follow, and their rich history of posting. So I did that in USA, again, 300 solicited. I went through Russia. I got 150, as they're nearly half the size of the United States, and the remaining 50 I solicited Canadians. Now, in order of who came back to actually, when I said I need your help as a citizen of your country to help me with the poll, and realize in Russian, it's all in Russia. Had a few missteps with other countries, but I narrowed it down to who was actually Russian. Took a little bit longer. But even in the face of all that, Canadians, by the large margin, over 50% of those sampled actually participated in the poll. 1/6 of every Russian I went out to participated in the poll. And the worst was USA, or I'm sorry, I just messed that up. 1/3 of every Russian I asked, using English, where they got to translate, 1/3, meaning 1 in 3 Russians, actually answered the poll. When I went to the States, only 1 in 6 Americans would participate in the poll. So half the participation rate of Russians. And of course, Canada wins that on willing to help when asked, will you help me with this poll? Regardless, all that being said, when you start to go through the numbers, out of 500 solicited, we had a total of 129 actual citizens of the participating countries, USA, Russia, and Canada, actually answered the survey. We even had comments, and there were likes and some retweets there. But participation, over 3,800 people had viewed that poll. And of course, of that, 129 participated. The stats are posted on my Facebook. We're going to run through those stats and what that means. So in large numbers here, of the 56 Americans, nearly most of them picked Russia. Immediately, the first go-to was Russia's the most autocratic, Russia's bad, bad, bad. The same exact thing from Russia's. This included Crimea, by the way. There's a good sample size from Crimea of participants here. I made sure to go through 85 regions as I did the 50 in the United States, and looking at their profiles, who for the states, who's Republican, who's Democrat. Almost an even mix there. I actually had 60% more Democrat participation than Republican. However, all that being said, it didn't matter. Whichever majority of Americans clearly picked Russia, majority of Russians clearly picked America. That's the go-to for both those countries. Few, if any, 2 from USA, 1 from Russia, actually picked Canada. Now, Canadian statistics, a whopping third, about a third, 10 picked Russia picked Canada as the most autocratic, which is almost a third of the sample. The next thing Canadians picked was America. America was more autocratic. It was almost 50-50 there. One point difference, just 10-9. And the last the Canadian picks was Russia, but absolutely divided. Of all 3 countries, Canada was divided nearly in a third on who to pick. Whereas when you look at Russia and USA, they knew to pick the other. That's the go-to for the average citizen. Why this is a problem, why it's a problem in Canada, is when you look at freedoms, okay, and how autocratic a government is, you have to look at it right across the board. You have to take the entire region, the entire country, and all of its breakdown. Canada has 10 provinces, 3 territories. The United States has 50 states, 9 territories. However, the way they administer territories is a lot different than many other nations in the world. So I don't count territories the same way as I would Canada, as they're not administered the same way. Russia, like Canada, administers territories and even other republics in a mix of what Canada does as well as what European Union does. So they're different in that way, but if we look at the 50 states versus the 85 regions of Russia versus the 10 provinces, 3 territories, you clearly see that constitutionalism is a clear importance in both Russia and the United States of America. That's extremely laid out very, very well. Russia Federation is kind of a version of the EU, whereas the United States is a much, much older version of what the EU is trying to be. However, it's administered very differently. And in fact, what the UN was established was done by the United States and Russia of the time as the former Soviet Union. Now, as they become the Russian Federation, they've maintained constitutionalism as a federal system, and then individually in the 85 as well. USA does the same thing. They have a federal constitutional system, and then they give a 50-state constitutional system where each state has it, just like the 85 regions of Russia. Whole division of powers clearly outlined for all those regions. That is not done in Canada. No territory or province has any kind of constitution whatsoever. Bill of Rights is not a constitution. That's an outline of the rights you should have. But without a constitution, nothing's enforced, and often it goes back to the federal system, which is colonialism, colonial power. Russia and the United States clearly both have no idea about colonialism or any thought of how that affects Canada. They clearly see Canada in some kind of light, whether the average Russian or American. They see each other as these evil enemies running in different constitutional systems, yet they don't address colonialism. Of their major partner on this earth and neighbor, when you look at the Arctic Ocean, we absolutely share that region of the world with Russia and the United States by the largest margin. Absolutely, Russia or USA is our southern neighbor, bordered by land. But when you take the globe and you put us along the Arctic Ocean, you clearly see Russia, Canada, and USA. And I mean a major area of the world we all overlap and share, divided by an ice sheet across the Arctic. But other than that, we're the closest neighbors. Clearly, those 3 countries were a neighborhood, an absolute neighborhood unto ourselves, large land masses in this world, but yet we don't seem to understand each other at all. And our politicians here in Canada utilize that, and clearly with the poll, well, you see Russians clearly support Russia regardless of region, and Americans, regardless of state, clearly support America. They're absolutely dead set against each other, and they have no clue or interest in Canada whatsoever. I think they think we're all silly, like the little Maple Leaf wearing the toques. We're just a joke. But they don't understand that we're absolute autocracy here. That's clear. And what's even worse, Canadians don't see it that way. Literally only a third of Canadians who responded, when clearly it's almost 56% of Canadians solicited answered the poll. And only a third of them believe that Canada is autocratic, and they're quite willing to jump to first USA as the bad guy, and then next is jump to Russia is the bad guy. Do you see a problem here, everybody? There's some kind of problem with the education system? Absolutely, in Canada. Never mind how the international community, our closest neighbors, look at us. And maybe it's why our politicians get away with so much on the world stage, as both Russia and USA, two different hands here, seem to think there's nothing wrong with Canada. It's somehow the land of freedom and rights and everything's great and wonderful. Can you believe that? Russians don't see it with Canada, and neither do Americans. How can these two polar opposites see Canada as not a problem, right? And that's clearly because of colonialism. Americans and Russians, the average citizen, has lost all concept of colonialism. It's so removed from those two particular world superpowers, they have no idea what's going on today. This poll is on. It's linked in the title. I'm going to check to make sure I actually added it to this title. I may not have, but I copied the link to put it in so that anyone who shares this can click on that and see all the stats. It's a rude awakening here. It's something I very much suspected, and it's something I'm going to have to work with. So people understand Russia has a constitutional obligation, even with Putin and everything everybody says. They have an absolute obligation to assist the international community. So when I run polls like this, I ran it right through the Russia Federation, several of their governments, even in their branches of executive throughout the regions I went through to solicit Russian citizens. These are absolute Russian citizens. Nobody blocked me. I never got any flack from the Russian government. There is talk. Putin and his insiders are talking about amending their constitution to remove that. But until they do, which I don't see that coming anytime soon, it's a pretty big undertaking. I'm going to continue, and I'm going to keep holding Russia to all these little experiments I want to do, as well as I want to go through the 85 regions, and I can't see how they're going to be able to restrict that. I don't see it. It's constitutionally protected, and citizens have been more than warm and welcoming into participation, at least 30%, which was like twice as good as America. And you think, well, we speak the same language, English. You think I'd get more help from Americans, but I didn't. I mean, in the academic world, I certainly did. Another major thing was media companies. The Canadian media companies chose not to look at my poll or even participate in it, but absolutely both Russia and the United States. I had Bloomberg participate. It got retweeted out by Bloomberg, and I absolutely got assistance from Russia with Rupley. MSN in the United States version, they actually sent it out too in their international scene. So other than that, any Canadian media companies absolutely refused any kind of assistance from me, which I find funny because CBC is absolutely public funded. You think that a poll like this, what's the problem here? A simple question. But they didn't. But at least it got viewed almost 4,000 times. I don't have the followers for that. So thanks, Bloomberg. Thanks, Rupley. I guess, America and Russia are cool, but Canada, not so much. But everybody, share it. Get it out there. It's important. It's a very important stat to know what we're up against with constitutionalism and why we need USA and Russia to absolutely help us with this. They just got to be woke back to the fact that colonialism is right here in your own neighborhood. It's right on your border. I know I'm breaking through academia, but it's going to be important to also share that out to the Russian people and the American people so they kind of have a little more detail about us, that we're not what you think it is. And the Canadian people need a big education, and I don't see why we can't go to those two superpowers and say, hey guys, you forgot all about us. And clearly your little war against each other, citizen-wise, the citizen rivalry, maybe start looking at your middleman here, because Canada's got some serious problems, and we're not what everybody thinks we are, even with our own citizens. A huge amount of work, but it's good to know, and you should all know that too going forward. Thanks, everybody. Have a great Sunday. I got so much work to do tonight. I got my girls yet too late tonight because I took too much out of Saturday and they want to spend a few extra hours. So it's what you got to do. That's what you get. You sacrifice here, you got to make up there. So thanks, everybody. Share it out. Bye now.